Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we are covering a very important topic in this webinar, email security. We all use emails. And the name of the webinar is, Are You Being Impersonated by Email Scammers? How to Protect Your Corporate Identity. And today I'm joined by our guest speaker, Elliot Wilkie. Elliot, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, so as Natasha said, I'm Elliot Wilkie. I'm the Senior Product Specialist at a company called Brigantia. We are a cybersecurity distributor. We partnered with the team at 101 Data Solutions. And my role inside of Brigantia is to primarily focus on kind of outbound email security, Microsoft 365 security, and dark web monitoring. And those are my kind of key focuses within cybersecurity itself.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm your host today. My name's Natasha Waldron, and I work at 101 Data Solutions, and I'm their marketing specialist, and I'm passionate about all things tech. So, Elliot, what are the email security threats?
So, yeah, there's quite a lot of security threats happening in the email world at the moment, and we can often think about email security as everything that's coming inbound into you. So often what we find is people saying, oh, I've received a suspicious looking email, or I've received something that's, like you hear often about the whole Nigerian prince scam. Everyone's very familiar with that. And you got, or from more of an organizational perspective, maybe someone's sending an email into you with like a fake invoice or something like that. But yeah, that's talking about the inbound emails that are coming into you as an organization. But we need to kind of flip that idea on its head a little bit. We need to start thinking about what's happening in terms of your outbound emails. And people don't tend to think about that from that perspective because we're so not insular, but we're thinking about how to protect ourselves and how we can protect what's going on with us without necessarily thinking about what's happening on the outbound perspective. And it's those outbound emails that threat actors are really starting to get a bit more of a hold on and trying to understand a bit more, right? Okay, how can we weaponize those emails that are going out from this organization? And it's going to help us earn a little bit more money. I don't know, Natasha, if you've got any specific examples that you've got.
Yeah, I mean, certainly kind of inbound ones, for sure. I've experienced a few previous work experience. I had one from a CEO, and he was asking me to get YouTube vouchers for everyone, purchase them myself, and then send him the codes. So I'm very aware of the inbound ones for sure. So the outbound ones, that's a really interesting point as well, because obviously that's really, putting your company and its domain at risk, because that's obviously, going to maybe your customers or your clients, and potentially hitting it that way as well.
Yeah, exactly that. That going out and getting vouchers is a really common scam. We see that quite a lot. Not necessarily just bespoke and unique to emails either. We see that happening with maybe WhatsApp messages, or we see it come to like SMS text messages, that sort of thing. So it's not just unique to email. It does expand out towards other messaging platforms as well. But yes, you're right. It's the outbound emails that we really wanted to focus on today, because there is that question of, okay, when we send an email, we're just kind of hoping and praying that the email gets delivered into the inbox without any issues at all. No issues with content that's been changed. And threat actors are finding ways to be able to change the content of the emails that you're sending out, or worse yet, actually impersonate you with your own actual email address and sending emails per person to be coming from you as an individual. And that's really what we want to be focusing on today.
I suppose as well, we all kind of like almost take it for granted that our email is just going to land in the box that we want it to and get to the receiver. I think we all take that for granted a little bit.
Yeah, and often we don't have visibility on what's happening with those emails after it's left our environment either. You send that email and you just expect that it ends up in the inbox, but unless someone tells you otherwise, you actually don't know that there's any issues relating to email deliverability. So yes, we're talking about email security today primarily, but there's an element of email deliverability that we need to focus on as well, which is beneficial for any organization, because let's be honest, if you can't send out your invoices to your clients, then how are you going to get paid? So
Exactly.
it's a real conversation.
It affects every department, in sales, marketing, we use email, and it's still a very powerful tool to, send out information, communication to potential customers, to customers. So yeah, it's a very important, it affects every department really.
Absolutely does. It absolutely does. So we've just got on the screen now an example of an impersonation attack. And so we can see that this is an email that's come from ronald.mcdonald@mcdonalds.com. And we can see it says, "Hi, Elliot, please find the following invoice attached. I'm traveling at the moment, so please will you pay this urgently so that this supplier can continue working on the project." And the project's been put on hold until that invoice is paid, basically. Now, as a recipient of this email, I might be looking at this thinking, okay, I've received an email that's asking me to make payment, and it's a little bit sort of pushy in terms of, things need to be urgent, things have been put on hold. And as part of my sort of understanding of, is this something that's malicious, is I'm going to be looking at where that email has actually come from. That's one of the key things that I'll be doing. So is this an email address that I recognize? And if so, then that's something that I can likely trust. And in this case, maybe I actually do genuinely work with Ronald McDonald at mcdonalds.com. And I may be looking at this thinking, okay, yeah, I understand this email has legitimately come from Ronald. He's maybe just being a bit under pressure from his boss. And maybe I just need to make sure that, right, I'll just get on this now so that there's no interruption in terms of the project. But the problem is that threat actors, they have found a way to be able to send an email on behalf of, in this case, ronald.mcdonald@mcdonalds.com without ever actually accessing the systems that McDonald's use to send out emails. Gosh. And this is because of the way that email works. Email was created 40 or 50 years ago, something like that. And it was designed as a way to be able to do long distance communication between one person and another with lots of information inside of that email. And the idea was great, long distance, instant communication, but it was never designed with security in mind. And as a result of that, we have just constantly been trying to put security measures in place to try and secure email as a communication standard without necessarily kind of without being able to use a new system, because it's become the global standard for communications between businesses. We can't move away from email, so we're constantly just putting these new security measures in place. In essence, just bandaging up and patching up email as a standard to make sure that it's secure. And because of this, it means that threat actors are utilizing these methods whereby they can send an email from any service that they like and send out something to say, "Yep, this has come from Ronald McDonald." And the problem is that those malicious emails, those impersonated emails, are coming into me, and I'll deliver them to my inbox, and I would then potentially trust this. And as McDonald's, I would be very concerned about that, because it looks like it's coming from, if I was McDonald's, it's coming from my domain, and I don't like that.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so what damage can this cause to an organization?
I mean, it's fairly big, to be honest. The sort of areas that we can cover off with kind of damage. And a big question that also comes about when I'm talking to people is, why does this matter to me as an organization to try and protect my customers or my suppliers or generally just the rest of the world from these impersonation attacks coming from my domain? And if you think about it, ransomware is the big topic at the moment in terms of cybersecurity. We see this happening a lot. It comes up in news quite often. We see, Marks and Spencers or Harrods in the news, talking about ransomware. And for those on today's session who's not familiar with ransomware or what it is, basically it's an attack that a threat actor has done, and that's allowed them to get access to the systems that an organization uses, and has locked down those systems, has locked down the files. And that means that you cannot, as a business owner or anybody that's worked within the business, you cannot then access those unless you pay a ransom. And that ransom is usually requested to be done via cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency is very, very difficult to track and see where that money is actually going. So because of that, if you think that, if we take that ronald.mcdonald@mcdonalds.com example that we saw just a second ago, and instead of it being somebody requesting that you pay a fake invoice, but what if it was an invoice that was actually a payload for ransomware, and you click on that, then if I was the recipient of that email from McDonald's, I'm going to be blaming McDonald's for the fact that I've got ransomware because this
Yeah.
email came from McDonald's.com. So I'm pointing my finger saying, McDonald's, you've given me ransomware. And as a business, this could be detrimental to me because maybe I'm a small business, maybe I'm just a small supplier or a small client. And I'm thinking, how am I supposed to be able to operate as a business? Because I've got, I'm not got access to my files, I'm not got access to my systems, I can't pay invoices, I'm not getting any income, and I could go bust as an organization. Now, if you think about it as one small company supplying to another small company, and a malicious email, an impersonated email comes from the supplier to the client, and the client gets ransomware, and they can't pay the supplier their invoices, and then it ends up being that the client then goes bust because they've had ransomware, which does happen. About 50% of businesses go bust within a year after getting ransomware.
Wow.
Then that supplier has now lost a customer. So that also answers the question as to what's the damage to me as an organization if someone impersonates my domain. I've lost revenue, I've lost profit, and I've lost any potential future business with that organization. On top of that, there's also a threat of what you call it, sort of identity fraud or even credit fraud.
Yeah.
And why is that the case? And it's primarily around the fact that if somebody is sending out an email from your actual email address, which they can do, so someone today could send out an email from my actual email address or Natasha's email address or anybody who's joined us today, somebody can do that. It doesn't have to be some made up email. It can be your actual email address. And if they're sending out an email to your client from your actual email, they're trying to look like they're coming from you. And they're prepared to be you. So they're stealing your identity in essence. But the flip side of that is if you've got an HR team inside of your business and a threat actor sends an email into your business from HR at followed by your domain, and is saying something along the lines of, we're updating our systems. Please, can you just inform us of your date of birth? Can you let us know your home address? Can you let us know the bank details that you want your money to be paid, your pay to be paid into? All of that detail. That could be enough for a threat actor, if they start getting responses back, to then take out credit agreements in your staff's name.
Oh,
well, then suddenly that becomes a major issue because you're going, well, hold on a minute. I've got my staff members who are, potentially under extreme stress because of the fact that they've got credit agreements being taken out in their name. They're maybe taken to court because of defaulting on payments or whatever's happening. And that, as a business for you as well, actually that becomes quite serious because you've got people who are not paying attention to their work. They're paying attention to the stresses outside of work, and you want to protect 100%. Your staff as much as possible. And this all, of course, culminates into reputational damage for you as a business. So not only are you then having maybe a potential reputational damage from your own staff because they've got, maybe taking out credit, there's people taking out credit agreements in their name, but it's also for your customers. Again, that finger pointing. I received an email from McDonald's.com. I'm pointing my finger at McDonald's saying, you gave me ransomware. Am I ever likely to go back to McDonald's again and spend money with them? Probably not. I'll start going to Burger King, or I'll go to somewhere else to get my burgers instead.
Yeah.
So it's much more around what is the perception that people will have if people then start sending out, or threat actors start sending out malicious emails from your domain.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point as well. I hadn't really thought about that, kind of like almost like your staff's mental health and that kind of thing, and how something like this, I mean, even clicking on something like that and it being, a bad effect on your business, let alone yourself, that could really make, people stress and really affect their mental health. So that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought of that one.
It is. And it's slightly tangential what I'm just going to mention as a quick offshoot of this comment, but mental health inside of cybersecurity is actually an area that we're seeing on the rise recently.
Really?
If you think about it, if someone is stressed, if someone is anxious because of their work, and they then get a malicious email coming inbound, which maybe has a few red flags in there, if you're not in the right frame of mind, you're far more likely to click on a malicious link or a payload or something along those lines without being critical of the email itself. And that means, and that comes down to, how was that staff member's mental health at that moment in time? And there's some areas, some organizations, I won't name any names just today because it's not the topic of conversation, but there are organizations that are coming out that are focusing on the mental health side of cybersecurity, which is an entirely new area. And it's
Yeah.
it's quite fascinating, really.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that's really in depth and like eye-opening reasons, actually. So, okay, let's look at. So we've looked at, the causes, and we've looked at, how it can potentially affect, an organization and staff and clients. So we're going to look at the solution now, which is DMARC. So what is DMARC, and why should organizations implement it?
Yeah, so DMARC, this might be a very new terminology for some people in today's session. It might be something that you're already familiar with, or you've come across it in the past. Maybe the likes of your marketing tool is saying that you need to have something like DMARC in place. And DMARC has been designed in a way to encompass the sort of things that we were talking about earlier on. So impersonation attacks, it's designed to protect you against those. It's designed to protect you against interception attacks. So when you send an email from point A to point B, a threat actor can sit in the middle in that transit process and change the contents of that email. So think about like a change of bank details notice. They'll come in, change the bank details so that it goes back to the threat actor rather than the supplier. And then it means that that money will then be paid to the wrong location. So we want to protect against that scenario, especially as a supplier, because I want my money to be going into my bank account.
Absolutely.
On top of that, DMARC also allows us to help improve email deliverability. So we're moving away from that cybersecurity conversation slightly here, because we want to understand, are the emails that we send out, are they actually ending up in the inbox of the recipient, or are they not? And we're not relying on the recipient to tell us whether or not it's landed in there. I want to know for a fact, is that in that client's inbox? Absolutely. The other side of it as well is it's giving us visibility. What is happening to those emails after I have clicked that send button? And if something has gone wrong, I want to know about it. And that's what DMARC does. Okay. Now, DMARC itself isn't really a standard unless we're to encompass a couple of other security standards. Some of you may have come across the terms SPF and DKIM in the past. So SPF, we can see it here. So some people refer to DKIM as DKIM, and I'll quickly run through what these are, but I'm not going to go technical with it today, simply because it can be, I could talk for days about them both, let's be honest. But Sender Policy Framework is what SPF stands for. And what it does is it's like an invite list to a party. The idea being that if you're not on the invite list, you're not allowed in. If you are, you're allowed into the party. Really what that means is, from an actual perspective of, from a technical standpoint, slightly more technical standpoint, it's a whitelisting of services that you use to send email. So if you use Microsoft 365 to send your emails to the whole world, you need to tell the world that you use Microsoft 365 so they know that they need to trust an email that's come from your domain, from Microsoft 365. Likewise, you need to do the same for your marketing tool that you utilize, or if you've got an invoicing tool that also utilizes your domain to send out those invoices. It's just making sure that the recipients know that it's come from a trustworthy source. On the other side of it, we then have DKIM, or DKIM, or actually the long name is Domain Keys Identified Mail. And what this is, and again, I'm not going to go technical with this whatsoever, but what it does, to use an analogy, is it's like a wax seal on a letter. And there's two main purposes to a wax seal. The first one is that the wax seal will allow us to identify where that email has originally come from, or where the letter has come from, because that wax seal is going to be unique to the sender themselves. On the same side of things, it will also allow us to identify if that letter has been intercepted in transit and the contents of that letter has been changed. So if that wax seal has been broken, you know that the contents have been changed. And basically DKIM or DKIM is the email equivalent of that wax seal. The sender, the sending source, your Microsoft 365, your MailChimps, your HubSpots, your Sage, whatever tool that is that you're utilizing, will put that wax seal onto that letter or that email to make sure that that email then gets delivered. Now, the problem is that SPF and DKIM on their own doesn't give any sort of protection. Well, it gives us some protection, but the decision is up to the recipient as to what happens to that email in the event that SPF and DKIM both fail. So if that wax seal has been broken and it's not come from a source that you say that you genuinely use, then you're leaving the decision up to the recipient as to whether or not they deliver that email. And in most cases, they will deliver that email into the inbox. Well, that email that fails SPF and DKIM is very likely to be a spoofed attack, an impersonation attack. Somebody is, impersonating your domain, trying to send something malicious to the recipients. And that's where DMARC then comes in. So DMARC, which stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting and Conformance. You can see why we call it DMARC instead of its full name. What it does is it allows you as the domain owner to dictate to the recipient what they need to do with an email in the event that SPF and DKIM fail. And it's one of 3 different things that you're telling the recipient to do, which is on just Natasha, if you could do the next slide, and I'll just talk through those now. So we can see here we've got P equals none, P equals quarantine, P equals reject. I know, starting to get a little bit technical now, but I'll explain each one of them. P equals none is when you are telling the recipient, I do not care what you do with this email that you receive from my domain that fails SPF and DKIM. But what I want you to do is I want you to send a report that comes back to me that tells me where did that email come from? Did it pass SPF? Did it pass DKIM? Did it pass DMARC? And also, when did you receive this email? And that will be all provided to you in a report. And that will give you just an insight into, are there any configuration issues with the sending sources that I genuinely use? And also will tell you if someone is impersonating your domain.
Gosh.
The next stage is P equals quarantine. And this is when you are telling the recipient, in the event that SPF and DKIM fail, I want you to put that email into either the junk mail folder if there's one available, or also the quarantine environment, again, if there's one available. Yes. Essentially, we're flagging the email as spam, which is great. But if we just kind of go back a little bit, and we're talking a little bit around sort of the mental health of the staff members or the recipient of the organization. Yes. If you've got someone that's stressed about their work and they see an email that's maybe demanding payment that goes into their junk folder, and it looks like it's coming from someone that they speak to on a regular basis, they're very likely to then still trust that email. They're just thinking, excuse me, we're looking at that email that's gone into the junk folder and we're trusting it. We're not scrutinizing that email because we're not in the right mental state, and we'll end up paying the invoice into the wrong place, which we don't want.
No.
So ideally what we want to do is we want to get to that P equals reject stage. That's full protection. You are telling the recipient when DMARC fails, or in other words, SPF and DKIM fail, I want you to bounce that email because it's going to be coming from a threat actor.
Yeah.
But that being said, we cannot go straight to P equals reject, because if we do, we run the risk of telling recipients to bounce legitimate emails. So we need to go through a learning phase first. And that's why P equals none exists.
I see.
Hopefully that was useful for everyone, but we can take questions at the end if needs be, or a separate session if needed as well.
Yes, thank you.
So just to kind of give you a bit of a visualization on this process. So we've got here, say on the left-hand side, the actual organization itself. So we've got, an organization that utilizes Microsoft or MailChimp or Google or Salesforce, and they utilize all of these tools to send out email on behalf of their environment. And what ends up happening is that an email that's legitimately coming from that company, say from their Microsoft 365, then gets delivered into my company, into Brigantia. Now, what we'll then do is we will then query the DNS, the domain name system of the sender, because that is where your SPF, your DKIM, and your DMARC is all located. So that's how I do my validation process. I'm checking the email, is it authenticated? And I need to have a look at that DNS to check to make sure that's definitely the case. So in this scenario, is this organization that's sending an email to me, are they telling me that they use Microsoft? They do. Okay, fantastic. We pass SPF. I'm also then going to check to see, is there a wax seal on that email that's being sent to me? Yes, there is. Is it broken? No, it's not. Fantastic. So it then passes both SPF and DKIM, and it will then deliver that email straight onto the recipient.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if an impersonated email comes from the actual domain itself, that's where the legitimate email came from, then my mail server, again, my environment is again going to check the DNS because it's coming from the same domain. And in this case, is the threat actor sending out that email from a service that this organization genuinely uses? Well, they won't. And the reason is because they don't have control or access to Sage, Salesforce, Microsoft, etc. So they, in this case, will actually be sending it from some Russian, Chinese, African tool that you've probably never heard of. So, but they will still send that email out from that service. They're also going to check to see, is there a wax seal on that letter? 95% of the time, that wax seal won't even be there. So it will always fail DKIM in that scenario. But even if they did, with the way that DKIM works, the wax seal would immediately break the moment that they send that email out. So it means that we would then always have an SPF and a DKIM failure, which would result in a DMARC failure. Now, if that organization was publishing P equals reject for DMARC, those receiving that my environment will then bounce that email back to the attacker. So the legitimate emails get delivered, the impersonated emails will get bounced. And then your domain is protected from those impersonation attacks. In both scenarios, you'll then get a report that is then generated. And this report is in XML format. I will show an example of that in just a minute. But we want to bring those into a dashboard because they're very, very complicated, these reports.
Right. So obviously, with the first two stages, the welcome to the party and the wax seal. So do most email platforms, they have those, right?
The vast majority of email platforms will have the wax seal and the SPF, or telling you what to do. The way that SPF works means that basically any platform will allow us to use basically say, yes, I use this service. So as a minimum, you'll have SPF. DKIM is also you want to have that. You're just basically adding those sources onto the invite list and say, yes, we use this. That's your SPF record, in essence, is that invite list into the party. But yes, that's most, if not all of them, will have SPF. Most of them have DKIM. If not, they should be coming onto DKIM very soon.
And then with DMARC, I suppose, because it has this report, you then can see actually exactly where the threats are coming, the threat actors are coming from and things. Does it show that kind of report, or
exactly that? So because you have the data, you've got the data there, and the advantage is it's not your own environment that's giving you these reports; it's the recipient that's sending these reports. And because it's the recipient, it means they can always tell you where this email actually came from, and that allows us to then identify whether the email came from a threat actor or a service that you genuinely use.
Yeah, because that's another scary thing, isn't it? Because I suppose if you have somehow been affected by, one of these, at-risk emails, even to receive them, you're a bit like, oh gosh, but to actually know where they've come from, because it's all very, this is what it's about, isn't it? But to actually, it's almost like we can then spy on them. They're not just spying on us, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we're spying, a little bit of spying on them, a little bit of knowing what services that they're using to send out these emails.
Yeah.
So we can, there's definitely stuff that we can learn from the threat actors, but really our primary goal is protect ourselves, protect the domain, protect from what's going on, and make sure that moving forward that we're not subject to any impersonation attacks, but at the same time ensuring that emails are still being delivered from the services that we genuinely do use.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So we're going to go into a demo right now. So you obviously with SendMark. And so how does SendMark help organizations with DMARC? So you've explained to us, the solution and how it works a bit. So how does SendMark help? And I'll let you take the stage a minute.
Yeah, 100%. So let me start showing my screen and we'll just have a quick look at how kind of initially what the DMARC reports actually look like. So we can see this is publicly available, by the way. This is Google's own website. So this is basically just them talking about what DMARC reports are. And as we scroll down, we can actually see this is what an example DMARC report looks like. So we've got things in here like the date range of when the email was sent out. And you can see when we have a look at the date range, that doesn't look like a standard day, month, year format. So I'm looking at this and go, well, what does it actually refer back to? What does this mean? And it's actually referring back to something called epoch time, which is a number of seconds after the 1st of January, 1970. And that's how computers basically work out time. And as a human, I don't know what that means. So I'll then need to go away and I'll work that out and I'll put it through some sort of translation tool to then work out what that is. Okay, I'll find out the data. That's okay. As you scroll further down, we'll then also have our source. So which tool was this email sent from? Except the problem is it's giving us this as what's known as an IP address. And that's just basically a string of numbers, or actually in the later version called IPv6, you've got letters in there as well. That is basically an address that tells the computer where to go. And as humans, we're not going to remember numbers, but for computers, that they're very good at numbers, so they'll then rely on those instead. And again, I'm not going to know what this relates back to. So again, I'll need to go away and interpret what this, or find out what this service relates back to. I then can go through and understand why we've got a DKIM failure and that sort of thing. But what's really worth pointing out with this is representing just one single email. And at Brigantia, as an example, we send about 5,000 emails per week. That's not particularly long. That's not a huge amount. That's about average for an organization of about maybe 50 users, something like that. Yeah. And that basically would take me, if I just went 1 minute to go through that report, that would take me 85 hours to go through every single report. I don't have 85 hours a week to go through all these reports. And quite frankly, I think I'd go insane if I did. And that's why we want to bring them into a platform that tells us what's happening. And that's where SendMark then comes in. It's kicked me out. That being said, I can demonstrate Microsoft SSO, Google SSO, and MFA is all supported when we log in. But we can see here that it presents that data back in something that makes a lot more sense to us. What is actually happening here? So how many emails are being sent out from us, either from a tool that we do use or one that's maybe a threat actor that's sending out those emails? When we jump into our email senders, we can see what the tools are that are sending out these emails. So you have things like HubSpot or Google or Microsoft, and what's happening with all this data? Do I need to start worrying about all these reds that we see, these apparent failures? What's going on here? On top of that, we've got our compliance. What's happening? So we've got a 96.3% compliance rating for DMARC across every email that's being sent out. So with that, I need to understand a bit more of is there anything that I need to worry about? Yeah. I'm not going to go too in depth with this data because it can get very technical very quickly, but it just presents all this data. And we're looking, I can extend this date range back. So if I go back, say, to the this is the beginning of the year, let's go back to the 1st of January. We're now looking at in excess of 200,000 emails. What we're actually looking at is in excess of 200,000 of these.
Yes.
Now, there's no way as a human you can work out what's going with this. And actually, as a further point to this, this is the exact reason why Google themselves say to get help from a third-party service. And as a recommendation, they, by the way, as Google, do not offer a service like this. They are not trying to flog their own services. This is something that they're just recommending that you use. And you can see even there as well, reports can be difficult to read, and recommend using a third-party service that specializes in DMARC because it can be, you get many reports each day, say up to hundreds, it can actually be up to thousands. And that then means that it's incredibly difficult for you to actually understand what is happening with those emails that you're sending out from your domain. And that's why we want to bring it back into here.
It certainly is a lot easier to understand.
It really is.
Yeah, nice visuals.
100%. You know, and everyone likes a bit of color, don't they? Instead of just text. So.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for showing us that. So obviously, as Elliot said, he hasn't gone deep dive into the platform, but if you did want to know more, then please contact us via our website, and we'll be happy to show you more. If you do have any questions, please let us know. But again, if you want to ask us at a later date, or you think of something later, then please get in touch with us. We don't have any questions, Elliot, so I'd like to say thank you so much for your time, and that was really, really enlightening and really informative.
Glad to hear it. I'm more than happy to help anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, and thank you for everyone for attending.
Thanks so much.